the starter files, if you first crack open either the package.json or you look at app.js and you say, Wes, these are the starter files, this seems like more code than I would expect to have on the Ender files. But that's stupid Ender files. But what we need to know here is that we are going to be building our application on something called Express. And Express is a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. So what is important about that is that it's unopinionated and it's minimalist, meaning that it doesn't do a whole lot by itself. So we need to pick and choose different pieces of the Node ecosystem in order to make things work for us. So that's fairly common in the Node ecosystem where nothing really comes batteries included. We are always working with external modules. We sort of just pull out different parts and use them together. Now, that's Express. That's what we're going to be using here. We are using something called Express Session to manage sessions. We'll learn all about that. We are using Mongoose to work with our MongoDB database. So that's sort of an interface for it. Then there's a couple other stuff here. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything here just right now, but we are going to come back and understand like what is a cookie parser, what is a body parser, what is Passport, what is Promisify, what is our error handling strategy, what is our middleware. We're going to learn all about these pieces, and rather than me sit here and explain all of the pieces to you right now, what's going to happen is we're going to learn each of these different pieces as we build our application. And as it's in context, we're going to come back to this app.js file and understand, okay, this is actually what it's doing. Also, what I want to tell you is that we have a start.js file. And what this start.js file does is first it imports Mongoose, which is going to be how we interface with our MongoDB. Then I've got this little if statement here. If you've made it this far and you are on a greater version than Node 7.6, this is just here to make sure that people don't skip this video and start up and with the old version of Node. So if you are on that, you can go ahead and delete that if you like. Then we have this thing called environmental variables. Now, what environmental variables are is generally that's where you store your sensitive information. That's where you store your passwords and usernames and logins and API keys and tokens and anything that you need to keep safe. So if we open up the variables.env, the reason why we don't keep this in a like a .txt or a .js file is that this should never actually go into your GitHub repo or your Git repo at all, because this is based on the environment that you're on. So we have a variables.env file that we're going to be using on this file, but you're also going to have one of these up on your server, and then that's going to be production. Maybe your database will be different. Maybe your mail server will be different. You'll have different API keys for all of those different ones. So what this package here does, .env, it will take anything that is in here and allow us to access it via process.env the name of the variable. So we're going to be using that quite a bit. That's why we put it in here. And when we first started off in the last video, we renamed it. It has a .sample on the end. So just triple check that you do not have a .sample on the end of that. Here is what we're doing is we are connecting to our MongoDB instance. So earlier we used our application, Compass, to connect to our database. But if we actually want to interface with it with code, MongoDB is going to connect to it. Now, we don't type in MongoDB right here. And the reason is because that will change depending on if we're locally or if we're in our production. So we say process.env.database. And then you can see that database is a variable that we have in this env file, and that is set in there. We are going to be using ES6 promises in Mongoose, so you could also use external libraries like Bluebird, but we're going to be using the built-in one so that we can use async await. That's why we have to do this little line right here. And then finally, what we're doing is we're listening for any errors that Mongoose is going to throw us. So we're having trouble connecting or something times out, we just want to console log it, and where that will show up is in our terminal once we start things. Finally, we require this application here. We're going to get into this whole require thing in a bit. Don't worry if you don't know it. And then we kick off our server. So let's get that started and just make sure that everything works for us. So let's go back to our terminal here, and you type npm start. And what npm start will do is, if you ever want to know what these commands are that we're typing in, is you can open up your package.json, and your package.json will have a scripts, and this will contain a whole bunch of different scripts that we can run. And in our case, we have a start, which is going to kick off another task called npm run watch, which is this one, nodemon start.js, and we're going to ignore the public file. What that means is that we're going to kick off a node process, which will start on start.js. And we're using a package called nodemon, which will monitor our files. And anytime there's a change to one of our JavaScript files, it's going to kill itself and restart the whole process, the whole server again. Because this is not like PHP where you simply refresh the browser. You need to stop the process and start it again. That's what nodemon will do. And then also, we are going to run assets, which is another command that we have here. And that will kick off a Webpack task. And this is just for our CSS and our client-side JavaScript. So this assets right here, the Webpack, has absolutely nothing to do with our backend process. It's simply just there so that we can compile our Sass into CSS and compile our front-end JavaScript into a bundle for us. So that's what that does right there. I'm not going to go into the Webpack stuff in this course, but if you're interested, I've heavily commented the Webpack. That will just go into exactly what everything is going on in there. There's a couple other ones in here in terms of deployment and loading in sample data. We'll get into all that. But for now, I just want to make sure that we can get everything running. So when we run npm start, what should happen is we're kicking off our concurrently task. The logs that come from the computer mean that it's coming from our node application. And the logs that come from the box are the logs that are coming from our Webpack application. So you should see Express is running on port 7777. If we go to our browser here and type in localhost 7777, you should see, hey, it works. So if you've gotten that far, we will skip to the next video and actually get into covering some of the fundamental concepts of this course.